Go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Nagy. Some of you may know me from the online conferences I've been doing over the last few years with Rob McNeely, the online psychotherapy conferences. A few less of you may know me as a Feldenkrais practitioner, but I'm here to talk to Rob about a new online program he is starting and to get an idea of what Rob is up to these days. So, Rob, you've got something coming up on how to build confidence for therapists,
Yeah,
confidence into their therapeutic skills. What are you up to these days?
yeah. Should I say something just about my background first? Just some people might not know me either.
Yeah, well, yeah, I
Simply,
think that'd be a good idea. I don't. I think a lot of people know that you were one of Milton Erickson's students for many years, but yeah,
yeah.
to fill us in on the details for those who don't know you.
Yeah, just briefly, I was in medical practice in Melbourne, in Australia, for 10 years, and got interested in hypnosis, and then through Milton Erickson, got really totally fascinated and taken over by what I learnt with him, and
Hmm.
incorporated that into a psychotherapy practice. When I left medical practice and went into therapy private practice, and that was about 40 years ago. And I've been teaching
Wow.
my version of his approach over the last 35 years to mostly face-to-face in Australia, but also in Scandinavia and the States and uh, in Brazil and other places,
Yeah,
and
you've been.
next year in the Czech Republic. So I'll really
Oh,
go.
wow.
I'll go anywhere that people are interested to learn. But it's a passion for me to provide some substantial and useful learning for therapists. I'm really it's abhorrent to me how much suffering people have. That with the best intentions, some therapeutic approaches actually contribute to the suffering and even make it worse.
Mm, right.
I'm really offended by the way people are pathologized and led to think that they're stuck in some kind of problem forever. And what I learned from Erickson, what I'm passionate about teaching and sharing with interested people, is that change is possible. People are flexible. We can learn. So
Hmm.
that's something about the background of where I've come from. But this particular program I'm calling Creating Therapy with Confidence.
Creating
Because,
therapy with confidence.
yes,
Uh-huh.
because I've noticed that whenever I'm doing workshop, people get the feeling, and I had this myself when I first started doing this work and met Erickson. Oh, this sounds great, but I'm not sure that I'm up to it. I'm not sure how I can translate this. I don't feel confident enough. And so to me, it's important not only to provide an opportunity for someone to learn something useful, but also to help foster the process of being confident enough to begin to use it and then develop their own style. So that's why we're calling it confidence, because it's a big issue for anyone learning any new approach. Big issue.
Right. Right.
And then within the program, I'm going to look at 6 specific, and I would say essential, skills that will apply to any therapeutic approach. And those skills, and there are probably a lot more, but I've distinguished 6 that I want to pay attention to that seem to me to be right at the core of effectiveness.
Okay, so
And by the
six
way,
skills you're going to be teaching to
yeah,
become a more effective therapist. Now, by the way, is this just for people starting out, or it's for seasoned therapists, or who would you say is this the best fit for?
well, I think it's going to be so generic that it's going to be useful for anyone starting, or no matter how skilled they are. Like I say, I've been doing this work for 35 years, teaching it. And each time I teach it face to face, and as I've been putting this online program together, I've learned some things. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's never too late to learn. Like Jeff Seid wrote in the front of a book he gave me, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. So
Mm-hmm.
we can learn. It's going to be relevant for people of all levels of expertise.
Okay.
All levels.
So, if I had been doing therapy for 20 years and I just wanted to start out and start learning how to use hypnosis, it would be valuable. or if I was just starting out to do cognitive behavioral or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about skills. I mean, how do you frame it? Skills to feel more confident, skills to...
Well, it's a complex and interrelated situation, but I'm wanting to make it simple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wanting to draw out issues that people don't need to learn anything new, but by exploring some aspects of our work that are there in the background, so much there that they're transparent, then we get to see them. We're
Right.
what some people call making the obvious apparent.
Yeah, well, that was a Feldenkrais thing. It's the elusive obvious, making the elusive obvious.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. All right. So, what are the six skills you're building?
Yeah, the topics I've drawn out, and by the way, they're not just off the top of my head. The relevance of these are borne out by Scott Miller's work with Barry Duncan and Bruce Wampold, and they've actually got statistical breakdown of their relevance. But the six that we're looking at, and they all happen within the context of confidence, and they are all interrelated. But the six that I've drawn out are the therapeutic relationship. We all know how important that is, crucial.
All right.
And the question is, how do we do it? We all know that sometimes we have a good relationship with clients and things go well, and sometimes we don't have a good relationship with clients. So the question is, how can we enhance this? How can we make the therapeutic alliance more effective, more relevant, more useful?
Okay.
The second topic I'm looking at is listening. We all know, we've been taught and we know intuitively that listening is a crucial part of any effective therapy. Some people come to a therapist, and if they have a sense that the therapist is really listening to them, who they are, sometimes that's sufficient. They'll go away and they say, oh, thank you. Yeah, to be heard. Mm-hmm. And so listening is something that we know about. We've experienced it with other people and clients when we listen to them. But the question is, how can we do that? What are we doing when we're listening? Is it some chance thing that we just have to hope for? Or is there something that we can do to attend to the quality of our listening so that we can be more effective listeners and more effective therapists? And the next one is restoring trust, restoring adult trust. Whenever any of us have a problem, one of the expected, always happening fallouts of this is that some damage to trust happens. If we have a problem with our body, we have some doubt about whether we can trust our body. If we have a problem in a relationship, we start to mistrust our partner. If we have a problem at work, we mistrust the organization. If we have a problem with the world, we start to mistrust the world. So we don't want to just go into a naive thing, oh, just trust me, you know, like a second-hand car salesman. Oh, just trust me, you can believe me. That's asking for disaster. And on the other hand, we don't want to get taken by the other extreme of, you know, once bitten, a billion times shy. Some people, when the trust is lost, they say, I'm never going to trust again. Fernando Flores calls this experience, he calls it cynicism, like a refusal to trust.
Right.
So if we refuse to trust, we're going to end up in a very small, very mean, very miserable life. And if we go the other end and we just trust everything, we're going to end up with a very short life. Pretty soon we'll get run over. So we're wanting to explore how we can navigate between those two extremes and find a way to restore trust in a way that's going to be viable and useful and solid.
Okay.
It's a big topic. Big topic.
Yeah. But now the first two you talked about were confidence, I think, in listening, right?
And therapeutic relationship, yeah.
The therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
And listening, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of those perhaps incorrectly as something sort of therapist focused, right? Like how to how do I establish a therapeutic relationship? How do I listen? And now when you're talking about trust, are you speaking specifically about how to help the client restore trust? Or am
Well,
I thinking about it incorrectly?
they're all two-way things, Ryan. When
Right.
we look at restoring trust within the client, then in order for us to do that, we have to trust the client. So then we as therapists are trusting the client. We're assuming that they're trustworthy. That allows them to be more self-trusting, and in a circular way, they're inclined to trust us more. When we look at listening, how we're wanting to listen to the client, it's something for us to attend to. But the focus is not on us. The focus is on what we can do in a way to get ourselves as people, as individuals out of the way, so that we can be truly listening to the client, focused on the client, receptive to the client. So it's something for us to learn and attend to and refine, but they're all related to the client, and there is a reflection back on how that affects us. And they're all interrelated, because when we really listen to someone and they notice that we're listening, it adds to the therapeutic relationship.
Very nice.
We've got a good therapeutic relationship. We're already generating a sense of mutual trust. So they're not distinct, but in this program, I'm taking them out, in each of them, in a somewhat artificial way, to have a look at them, have a look at the different components, the different skills, and explore them and refine them and develop our sensitivities to them, so then they can get back in the soup and just become part of what we're doing.
Great.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I've got more questions, but let's I don't want to get off track here. What are the other? We've got the first three components. And you mentioned
I want to mention the others. Are all as important as the other. Expectancy. It's a gift if we can bring expectancy to the conversation. Every client, every problem that any of us ever has comes with a mood of resignation. Clients don't come and say, I've got this problem, and I know that any moment it's going to be fine.
Right.
When we have a problem, we say, oh, this is what's happening. And there's some mood about it where we feel this is how it's been, this is how it is, and this is how it's going to be. It's not logical, but there's a mood about that keeps it stuck. So if we can generate from ourselves a mood of expectancy, the client has a chance of picking that up. And the side benefit of that is that when a client's resigned, instead of us picking up their resignation, think, oh God, this is terrible, I know it's too much for me, we can, by starting and putting ourselves in a mood of expectancy, we immunize ourselves against catching the client's mood of resignation, and we can inoculate them with our mood of expectancy. So then that opens up a possibility of seeing options that otherwise we wouldn't bother looking at. With resignation, why bother looking? Because it's not going to be there.
Yeah. And I would say this is a topic you and I have covered on some of these teleseminars that we've done. I've found it very powerful. And it's something that kind of bleeds over into, personal relationships and
absolutely
business relationships. And
we don't live our lives in water. We don't live our lives in watertight compartments. This is all very porous. The next skill that we're going to look at in this program is how to access resources. And after my time with Erickson, I was really taken by his starting point that every person has more resources than they realize. And he framed every problem as a learned limitation. We learn to limit ourselves. It means that we, throughout our experience and when we have a problem, we become disconnected from some ability, some skill, some resources that we had in the past, that we used in the past, we become disconnected from. Hence the problem. That if we can find a way of reconnecting with them, we don't have a problem. I'll give you a brief example. I probably mentioned this before and I might again, but it's too good not to speak about. Erickson told me that he had a phone call from a woman saying that she'd been washing her hands obsessively for 12 years. And he said he was very interested to find what she used to do with her hands 13 years ago. So do you get what he was on about? He wasn't saying, oh, how come was there a trauma that she's got stuck in? She got obsessive compulsive disorder? No. She used to wash her hands in an ordinary way. She's got that ability, but she's lost contact with it. She's forgotten about it. She's become disconnected from it. So the idea of, oh, how did you used to do it? Maybe you can do that. That creates the possibility of just reconnecting with something that's been there, unused, unexplored, and just waiting patiently to have a chance to come in.
Taking her back to a time when she was washing her hands once or twice a day and talking about it and bringing it up.
Just normal, yeah. And also we can access resources in the present as well as the past and in the future.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like when things are gone and so on. And the last skill that's just as important as any of the others, and it's related to everything, is self-care. How can we take care of ourselves? Spike Milligan said he wanted on his tombstone to be said, I told you I was sick. You know, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be any use to anyone. I know, and I think we've all had the experience of feeling overly tired or overly burdened about something, and we're not doing good work. We're not on the job. And there's something about generating the relationship, listening, restoring trust, creating expectancy, and helping people to get in touch with their resources that takes care of us. So just doing work.
I think being a better therapist is actually is a part of being self-care, right? If you see people changing, getting over their depression or changing, then
So taking care of all those things helps to take care of us, and by taking care of ourselves. And there's some specific options that we'll explore in the program to do just that. When we take care of ourselves, we are more available, we do better work, and so on. It's like a circular thing. So that's...
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say that's something of the content of the program.
Yeah, and so what I was wondering, of course, is how it's going to unfold for a participant. So people click, they enroll in the program, and what's the first thing that's going to happen? You guys are doing teleseminars, you're doing email conversations. How are you teaching people?
Well, it's taking place on a specific website, and the program will begin on the 10th of November, and it's going to last for 4 weeks. And when people first enroll, they put some information in about themselves, a photograph and so on, so that other people in the program know who they're in the program with. Then we have a combination of written material, audio lectures, video demonstrations, PowerPoint slides, so that people can look in whichever way or listen in whatever mode is going to be suitable for them. It's released gradually. It's not all just dumped there so that people can get overwhelmed and think, oh my goodness. So it's released in segments every day, a couple of days, sometimes once a week. There's just enough for people to have time in a busy life. Yeah. And the program is going to be there and available for people to interact directly on the program, on the website, for 3 months. And during that time, people can download all of the material and have as a permanent resource that they can refer back to and review anytime without limit in the future, because they'll have it. They'll have it.
Yeah, I found it in all the various online programs I've either taught or been a participant in. That's hugely important. It's hugely important. You know, you're sitting down and you go through a program, and it's a few weeks later, and you think, oh, there was a piece that Rob said, or there's a piece that this person said I want to go over again.
Exactly.
I want to listen to again. That's been very helpful. I think that's why online learning can be so effective.
And as an extension of that, some people, as soon as the website's up, they kind of jump in and they're doing this and they're doing that. And there's opportunities for conversations on Skype, where there are coaching calls directly with me, which are videoed. And people
you didn't mention that before. So there's sort of the course to go through, and then once a week, people are going to get on. I think you're doing everything in video now, right? So it's kind of like this. Is that?
Yes, people say that the video is preferable to audio. They have a better sense of who they're in the program with. It seems to be
Hmm.
helpful.
Yeah.
But some people, like I say, jump in and they as soon as something's there, they do it. Other people just sit and it's in the background and they get to it when they want. So there's no regulation or even recommendation about how
Hmm.
fast you do it. Some people wait till the program is finished at the end of the 4 weeks or at the end of the 3 months, and then they start to look at it themselves then. There's no right
Hmm.
way of doing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually in a program right now where I missed the first couple of coaching calls. I was busy going through the program, and I jumped on one today, and I
Hmm.
was like, this is exactly what I needed, a little bit of live interaction to,
Hmm.
so, uh, great.
And
So what else do people need to know here for, what do you think?
well, one of the policies I've had for decades now is whenever anyone's paid for a program, previously face-to-face program, it belongs to them. So whenever I'm running it any other time in the future, they're welcome to return and review it without payment. So I'm making the same offer with this. Anyone enrolling in this program, when I run it again, which I will do in, I don't know, sometime a year or something like that, even if I add something, even if it's really quite different, as long as it's in content, as long as it's the same program, someone who's paid for it can enroll again anytime in the future for unlimited number of times without further.
That's great. Yeah.
So,
And I'm assuming they'll just send you an email and say, hey, Rob, I was in this program last year. Can you give me a login to this one?
well, what I'll do is ask people in the program if they're interested to find out, and then I'll keep a note of their email addresses and then automatically let them know. They won't need to approach me. I'll let them
Okay.
know when it's on. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So, one of the questions that whenever I look at a possible learning project, I think, well, firstly, who's running this? How come they reckon that they can do this? And the second thing I like to look at, and I think we probably all do, is, so why would I want to do it?
Hmm.
And
Yeah, to me, you're already the expert, but because I've known you for so long, and
yeah,
I sometimes push you to do events like, "Hey, Rob, I want to do a teleseminar on this." But yeah, I guess people need to know. So, what makes you the expert on this? Why should people
well,
trust
this
that
is a
you
this is
can get
this,
them?
yeah, it's a funny thing, Ryan. In this program, I'm not going to be the expert.
Hmm.
I'm going to be in the program, creating the context, offering some ideas, some propositions, some perspectives, some thoughts.
Hmm.
Really, my reflections, what I've learned, not to be put there as from a position of an expert, but just this is my experience, so that anyone in the program can have an opportunity to engage with me in what I've done, so they can make their own translation, their own version, their own corrections. And I'm looking forward to learning from participants in the program about what I can do to improve what I'm doing. So I might have been doing this specifically for longer than anyone in the program, but very much we're going to be in it like colleagues learning together. And that's something that I
Okay.
learned from Ericsson. I mean, he said, don't try and be like me. He said, you couldn't anyhow. He wasn't a
Right.
humble fellow. Don't try and
Hmm.
be like, you couldn't anyhow. Don't try and be like me, be like you. So this is an invitation in this program for people to refine and develop sensitivities about the areas that are important to them in a safe environment where we can play, where we don't need to get it right. We can even get it very wrong. I'm expecting that someone in the program is going to say, what you wrote here is totally wrong. I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Hmm.
And the other thing that I'd say is that I've been teaching these distinctions, these components, for about 20 years now as part of an advanced program that I've been teaching in Australia mostly. So
Face
that
to face
there's
program. Yeah.
face to face. So there's been a lot of opportunity to refine the way that this is presented so that people can connect with it, relate to it, and learn from it. And I would say that uh, I wish that I'd known about a program like this 30 or 40 years ago.
Hmm.
It would have saved me a lot of blind alleys, a lot of suffering, a lot of burnout, a lot of insecurities and unconfidences. But there's nothing complicated in it, Ryan. We're not. This is not rocket science. When you don't, no one needs to learn anything. Some very complex taxonomy of this or that. We're just going to be looking together at some of the things that we do and see how we can do them in a way that is going to be more effective, easily learned, and readily translatable into each individual's practice.
Just sort of bring that forth in each individual person and help them be more effective.
Precisely. So that's why I say I'm not an expert. We're growing a garden in the house. We've just been in it a couple of years now. And, I put a lot of plants in there, a lot of cuttings, a lot of seedlings and so on. And I put some fertilizer on it and I water it, but I'm not growing the plants. I'm the gardener. The plants are doing the growing, not me. When I was in general practice, I delivered a lot of babies. I don't know, hundreds. And I've never been pregnant, never expect to be. I've never been through childbirth. But I was able to be in a certain way that made a huge difference to how people had their babies, how women had their babies. So in that way, I think that in this learning, I don't know whether you're familiar, it's a rather an old-fashioned term, an accoucheur. And accoucheur is like a midwife.
Okay.
Someone who's there to facilitate the natural process of childbirth, to make it easier to get out of the way so that it can just happen. So that's how I see myself in this process.
Yeah, those are lovely metaphors for me for me, and I think for people to latch onto.
Okay.
All right. Have we covered everything we need?
Well, what other concerns do you think people might have? Time is one issue that people have.
Yeah, and I think you solved that, right? Because they can go through it on their own time. They can do it all at once. They can do it bit by bit. You said they have 3 months to be live on the site and to interact with you. But before that 3-month time, they can actually download everything.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the other thing that I hear as a concern is, is it going to be too complicated? Is it for me? And it seems to me that those issues that I've outlined are perennial. They are just there always for any of us at any time. They're going to be relevant to any serious therapist, helpful and relevant to them.
Yeah, well, my own experience with you doing some of these teleseminar series, and this is obviously more than a teleseminar series, is that you were kind of helping me. I don't know, how can I say this? There are little bits and pieces that I could take here and there and sort of bringing forth my own abilities.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there was something out there, like taking a test and memorizing things. And I found that to be very, very useful. I could really focus on the material and what was relevant for me.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
It sounds like you're doing that same thing again here. So.
Yeah, there was someone who studied with Erickson. Erickson, towards the end of his life, was in a wheelchair. He wore purple pajamas, and he lived in Phoenix. He had a strong Southern accent. So the student went back to New York, a young man, got into a wheelchair, put on purple pajamas, and started to speak with a strong Southern accent. Erickson was very offended by that. So no one, I think, should put themselves up as an expert in anything. I've met a lot of experts, and I find them somewhat intimidating, unapproachable, and hard to learn from. So I'm more interested to be there with someone, helping them learn so we can learn together. I think it's more useful.
That's definitely what you're known for. So
okay, no, that's
in my mind.
Thank you.
All right, so I hope this was useful to everyone listening, and hopefully see you on the other side. See you in the course.
That's great. Thanks so much, Ryan.
You bet. It's been fun. I really loved having a chance to touch base via video. It just makes things so much easier and
I think so.
Real.
Okay.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.